Hey, welcome back. It's Mickey D here, and today I have a bit more of an in-depth, fundamental video for Star Wars Unlimited here. So I have a couple notes right up top. One, I want to shout out my team. Huge shout outs to everyone who kind of helped this come together. So my team, the Bothan Network, they kind of all collaborated and helped me edit this down and help it make more sense. John Tata, Professor Numpty, the Sith Lord, he really helped me with one specific part of this and kind of confirmed an idea I was having for me, as well as Brad and Adam locally. I sent this script to them as well to kind of get their thoughts on it and their input. Which leads me to my second point, that unlike most of my other videos, this one is pretty heavily scripted. I actually just had a recording fail because I'm not great at reading scripts, so I'm going to try and go a little bit more off script than I was. I'm going to just kind of use my script to hit the highlights. But if I'm looking away or if I ever pause a little bit, I apologize, but I'm just double checking my script and making sure I'm kind of on pace with everything. So let's dive into what I think are the four fundamentals of SWU, or the four axes of SWU. I like to think about it. So when playing Star Wars Unlimited, oftentimes there's decision trees of should I have made a trade? Should I have gone base? Should I play a certain card over another card? And after being asked this enough times by friends and locals, I always came up with this analogy of sliders. And so you're sliding up a certain axis while sliding down another. You can't get an advantage in everything until maybe super late in the game where your opponent has no resources left. And so after thinking about it enough, I kind of distilled it down to these four different fundamental areas that I think you can fight over consistently in a game of Star Wars Unlimited. And that would be the card advantage battle, the resource advantage battle, the battle over board control and damage, as well as an action advantage battle. So before we dive into how these all kind of interact and how you sacrifice advantages in one to gain advantages in another, let's dive into each axis individually and kind of discuss through the lens of specific cards how you can kind of gain advantages in each specific area. So for card advantage, boiled down to the basics, it is having more cards available to you at any given time over your opponent. So that includes cards in hand and cards in play, and just having more total of that versus your opponent. So some obvious examples of cards that do that are Dr. Pershing. You're tapping him, you're dealing a damage or something, but you're getting a card. Pillage also does a similar type of thing where for one card of yours, you're discarding two of your opponent's cards, leaving you net up a single card over your opponent. And Tech does it in a little bit different of a way where he gives you access to a whole new suite of options. And whenever you use that option with Tech of playing a card from your resource row, that's a card you wouldn't normally have available to you. So you're kind of net one card from that ability. Other cards I didn't include on this slide that kind of act as card advantage are mass removal spells or mass removal events like Super Laser Blast. Oftentimes you're doing it for a different reason, but if that Super Laser Blast is one card that's getting rid of 5 of your opponent's units, that's 5 cards for your single card, and that's a form of card advantage as well. The next axis you can fight on is this resource advantage axis, and so there's a couple different ways you can do that. One is to try and fight for a permanent resource advantage. That is cards like Resupply and Super Laser Technician. You are playing a card to get a permanent resource for the rest of the game. Other ways you can do it, though, are through temporary resources. Han Solo's ability does this by tapping, you put a resource from your hand, and so you have a temporary resource for that turn. Other cards like Triple Dark Raid and Sneak Attack give you temporary resource discounts for a single action. So they will make your unit that you're trying to play off of them cheaper for a single action that's gaining a resource advantage over your opponent. Another more sneaky way you can get a resource advantage over your opponent is just by resource efficiency of the cards themselves. What do I mean by that? So, Fell the Dragon is a 4-cost event. Oftentimes, by defeating a leader or a non-leader unit with 5 or greater power, you're defeating a card that costs more than that Fell the Dragon. So let's say your Fell the Dragon is taking out a Reinforcement Walker. That Reinforcement Walker costs them 8 resources, while this Fell the Dragon only costs you 4 resources. That gives you a net 4 resource advantage over your opponent, since you spent only 4 to their 8. The third kind of axis you can fight over is damage and board control. And this kind of splits into 2 separate things. So let's cover the damage aspect first. Damage is just damage to the base. And cards like Four Cause I Believe In and Daring Raid just can deal direct damage to the base, where Surprise Strike and Hotshot Blaster can let your units do even more damage to the base than you normally would be doing. However, your base isn't the only thing with health on the board usually. Oftentimes you have units in play that have health on them as well. And so another way you can kind of gain in that damage and board control is just by trading your units onto the board. And so if my Battlefield Marine attacks your Sabine Wren, I'm dealing 3 less damage to your base, but it's still dealing 3 damage to a unit. And I'm also mitigating 3 damage I could take on the way back. In that lens, let's think about like a card like Daring Raid again. So that Daring Raid can deal 2 damage to their base, but that Daring Raid could also deal 2 damage to their Kylo's TIE Silencer, removing it from the board. I'm still dealing 2 damage to the total health pool on my opponent's side of the board. However, I'm also saving myself at least 3 damage I would be taking from that Kylo's TIE Silencer. It can get a lot more nuanced than this, and you can honestly do probably a whole video just about trading units and the damage race and controlling the board, but at a broad level, that's kind of what it is. For a final example of a card that's kind of like a mass board control card, Overwhelming Barrage, while not directly dealing damage to the base ever, as an event itself, it is going to oftentimes deal with 3 damage or 3 units from your opponent's board, taking out 10 damage that is potentially being done to your base, while also giving your guy a small buff and dealing a little bit extra damage to their base. So the action advantage part of this is the part I'm still wrapping my head around, and it's mostly because, while maybe not wholly unique to Star Wars Unlimited, it is where I was first introduced to the idea of a back and forth action system in a competitive 1v1 card game. So the way I like to think about this action advantage system is it's kind of a sliding scale between action efficiency versus total actions taken. There are some instances where you just want to be as action efficient as possible, always claiming the initiative, always having the first action, and being able to determine what units are going to trade where, as well as being able to guarantee push extra damage with any one specific unit by having that initiative. On the contrary, there are times where you want to be more reactive and stay behind your opponent in terms of action efficiency, so you can, answer their threats. There's also the idea of, if your opponent is going to claim initiative, you might as well do as much stuff after that as possible and just up your total number of actions taken. Because while you can be action efficient, sometimes just taking more actions than your opponent can win you the game. This is often the case when your leader deploys a turn earlier than your opponent's leader. So Sabine runs into this often, where your opponent's just going to claim, so I'm going to do 3 to 4 additional actions and just kind of overwhelm you on total actions taken as opposed to how efficient my actions are. Let's dive into some cards that I think really exemplify this action efficiency. Darth Vader is the first one. I think it's really kind of the best example of a ton of actions distilled into one card. Not the most obvious, but I think the best, because Darth Vader, you play the unit, that's an action. You get to clear something with the ambush ability, that's another action. So ambush in itself, part of why it's so powerful is it's kind of 2 actions in one, playing the unit and then ambushing the unit. Vader gets to do some additional stuff where he gets to pull 1 to 3 potentially other units, so that's 1 to 3 more actions. And let's say those units do something when they enter play, like a Death Trooper. That's another action effectively that you're taking. So if you Darth Vader attack into one of their units and pull a Death Trooper, you're kind of doing 4 actions in one, playing 2 units, getting an ambush, and getting the Death Trooper when played ability. Fleet Lieutenant is a smaller version of action efficiency. It allows you to play a unit while also attacking with another unit. It's also kind of a damage card, but we'll get into how these axes interact with each other in just a bit. But Fleet Lieutenant condenses 2 actions into one by playing a unit while also attacking with a unit. And then I think the most obvious example of these action efficient cards and like action condensing cards are the 4-cost legendary double aspect events from set 1. They tell you to do 2 actions on the card, and sometimes one of those actions is 2 actions in itself. Like, look at Cunning. You're exhausting 2 units. That's basically 2 actions, and that's only one of the 2 actions you get to choose from the card itself. So those are very clear examples of doing a lot of actions in a single action. So now that we've laid the groundwork for these different axes of advantage that you can fight over, let's take a look at these example cards again from the different, like where they're strongest, and see what else they get you as well as what you're sacrificing by playing them. So in the example of Dr. Pershing, you're getting up on card advantage, but you're not really presenting any sort of damage or board control. You're playing a 0/5. That's not going to really, it's not going to attack anything effectively almost ever, and it's not really going to help you in the damage race. Although maybe a little bit because your opponent wants to clear it and take care of it. Pillage is definitely not helping you in the damage race. It's getting 2 of their cards for 1 of yours, but you're spending 4 resources to not deploy any units. You now have no body on board for your 4 resource play, and so you're trading that card advantage for that tempo and that board control and that damage race. I think often that's kind of the trade-off. But for an example of where you're not necessarily trading board control, you're trading something else for card advantage, Tech is kind of the perfect example. Tech is not the most efficiently statted body. A 2/5 for 3 is definitely a little below rate. You'd want 1 more power in there. But he has a big impact on the board because it's such a threat. Pershing is also a threat, but is easier to clear. Tech fights back a little bit, and so he can impact that damage race himself as well. The axes you're kind of sacrificing instead is on the resource advantage side of things. Everything that you would play with Tech costs 2 more than it normally does. On a side note, I think this, going through the script and writing it, made me realize part of exactly why I think the Tech DJ combo is so strong. It seems obvious at first, but really diving into it, if you think about it, the weakness of Tech is that he costs you more resources, but with DJ, the smoggle cost is actually less than normal, so it mitigates the negative there, as well as with the Han 1 Tech DJ combo, you're permanently gaining a resource, so it helps you mitigate Tech's downside in the long run as well. So that's, going through this, I started to realize I think that's a big part of why Tech DJ is as busted as it is. For the resource advantage cards, Resupply and Super Laser Tech kind of trade similarly to the card advantage. They're trading that board control and that damage race. Less so with Super Laser Tech, but especially with Resupply. You're not developing a unit at all. So you're not impacting the board, you're not pushing for damage at all, and you're getting that resource in its place. With Resupply, you're also kind of down on the card advantage battle because you're spending a card just to get a resource and not getting a card back for it. And so that's another trade-off there. But with Resupply and Super Laser Tech, that's why I think leaders with super impactful flips are better with ramp than otherwise, because I'm okay losing that tempo for a turn with Resupply or Super Laser Tech if it means I have the access to my Kira flip turn sooner. If it means I get to more readily flip my Kira, which is going to get me back some of that damage control and that board control. For the temporary resource options, Han Solo's ability is often costing you a card from hand. It's always costing you a card from hand. It is also costing you an action. And that's relevant a good chunk of time where Han players often don't have initiative going into turn 2 because they're using an action and then playing something. What they're gaining in return for this is, at least in the early game, they can gain a lot of different things from this, but as an obvious example, in the early game, with that extra resource, they're playing something like a Liberated Slaves or Millennium Falcon, which is above rate in terms of board control and the damage race than it normally would be. So that's the trade-off you're making there. For Triple Dark Raid and Sneak Attack, you are oftentimes getting a discount on a unit and pushing damage at the same time. So like a Triple Dark Raid into a Ruthless Raider is going to push a ton of damage to the base. But what you're losing out on is you're not getting a permanent board presence. So that board control side of it is going to be lost a little bit. Because no matter what, either way, whether it's going back to your hand or to the discard and you're defeating it, that unit is not sticking in play until the next turn, into the next turn. Where they differ a little bit is that Triple Dark Raid is card neutral because you're digging for cards. Like you're digging in the top 7 cards of your library, and after it goes back to your hand, that Triple Dark Raid basically became whatever card you played off of it. Whereas Sneak Attack, you're down the card. The trade-off, on the other hand, is that Sneak Attack is very controlled. You get to choose what card from your hand you're Sneak Attacking in, whereas Triple Dark Raid is going to be random. You get a look at 7, and you're often going to have some hits, but you can't guarantee anything with it. All right. Give me a second as I pivot to my script just a little bit as we go into the damage and board control aspect. So each of these sacrifice in a different area. For a Cause is just a pure damage card. And so it's kind of sacrificing in all 4 areas. What it makes up for in that is it's just like, it is action efficient to deal 4 damage with 1 card. That is like the most you can do with 1 card as far as I'm aware in a single action. Condensing that action efficiency into 1. But you're down the card because for a card, you get card selection. You get a look at the top 4, but it's not replacing itself. And so you're down the card. You didn't control the board at all, and you spent 3 resources, but it is super efficient action-wise. Daring Raid is kind of the opposite problem. It's very resource efficient. 1 resource for 2 damage is like a pretty efficient use of your resources. If you could do that over the course of a game, you would only take 15 resources to defeat your opponent, right? Like, that's not a bad trade-off. But it is pretty action inefficient. Oftentimes, Daring Raid isn't enough on its own to take care of something. You either have to pair it with like a Tarkin Town, or you have to pair it with an attack from another unit or something like that for it to fully reach its potential. Surprise Strike is sometimes card disadvantage because in a lot of cases, a Surprise Strike is only doing the 3 damage, and if you want to use it for board control as opposed to the damage race, sometimes you have to use your Surprise Strike plus a unit in play to defeat one of your opponent's units, and so you're giving them 2 cards for your 1. Not all the time, but some of the time. The Hotshot DL44 Blaster, the smuggle means it's pretty card advantage efficient. Like it fights pretty well on that axis. It's pretty action efficient because you get the pump plus the attack in one go. Same with Surprise Strike. Surprise Strike is also very action efficient. Where its inefficiency is in its resources. Kind of like for a Cause a little bit. Where Hotshot DL44 Blaster, like 3 cost for just 2 attack pump, isn't the most efficient use of your resources. I think I said it's like for a Cause. I mean the opposite. My brain is a little frozen. I apologize. A lot of it going on at once. Finally, Overwhelming Barrage. It's very efficient resource-wise because oftentimes you're using 5 resources to take care of 8 resources worth of their units. You're oftentimes using 1 card to take care of 3 of their cards with Overwhelming Barrage. It's pretty good in a damage race, but it does make it so you often lose initiative, and you're kind of... It is action efficient because it's taking care of 3 for 1, but on the back end of it, your opponent's going to have initiative going to the next turn, so it can kind of lose you ground in the action efficiency axis a little bit. For cards that impact the board or that impact the action advantage axis, Darth Vader kind of does it all. He helps you develop the board while also removing damage from your opponent's board. And for playing just 1 card, you're often getting 2 to 3 cards out of it. So that's card advantage, right? That's board advantage that you're getting. You're like helping the damage race by clearing some of the damage off your opponent's board. and it's just condensing all these actions into one. Plus, oftentimes you're getting 10 resources of cards, literally 4-7 resources, so it's pretty resource efficient. And so this is where the sliding scale part of action advantage comes in, to where like you're being action efficient, like you're being very action dense, but oftentimes on the following turn you leave yourself action flooded. Now on the next turn you have 3 different units you want to attack with potentially, and you can't attack with them all. And so like you have to make a decision then of like basically taking out a loan. I'm going to get super action efficient now to be a little action inefficient later. Fleet Lieutenant is a little bit easier to see, where you get a nice damage buff, as well as being action efficient. If you attack with a Rebel, you're getting +2 on the damage race. But a 3-cost 3/3 unit isn't necessarily the most resource efficient. We have Battlefield Marine, that's a 2-cost 3/3, right? So it's not fully resource efficient of a unit, of a body. And so now we come to the legendary events. And I think part of what makes them so powerful is they often, since they're so modal, they can often fight on the axis you need most, in addition to being 2 to 3 actions in one. For example, Cunning can help the damage race with 3 of its mode by pumping and tapping 2 units or bouncing a thing, while also helping you kind of stay neutral on the card advantage exchange by making them discard a card. Aggression can draw you a card for the card advantage battle. It can defeat 2 upgrades, which helps you both with card advantage and resources if the upgrades you're defeating cost more than the aggression itself. And it helps you in the damage race by dealing 4 damage to a unit or readying a unit that you can then attack with again. So they're so powerful because they can fight on whatever axis you need to. They can't fight on every single axis at once, but they can oftentimes fight in where you need it. So I hope you can see that even in the cards themselves, there's often a trade-off. Inherently through the design of the game, by trying to gain an advantage in one way, you're often sacrificing an advantage in another axis. It comes down to trying to figure out if the advantage you're gaining is worth the sacrifice, as well as what axis you need to most be fighting over in any given moment. Let's take an extreme example here. Let's say you had a card, apologies for the magic cards, but it was just the easiest way to, in my brain, to do this. Say you had a card that lets you draw 3 cards, or did 3 damage to a unit or a base. Now, I would say 99% of the time that 3 cards is going to be better, because most often that 3 cards that you draw is going to turn into more than 3 damage. But let's say your opponent's base is at 27. Of course you're going to take that 3 damage. That's just going to end the game. That means we're prioritizing the damage axis in that case. On the flip side, on the defensive side of things, let's say you are at 26 damage on your base, and your opponent has a 4 power unit with 3 health remaining that is about to attack you if you don't deal with it in this next action. While you'd love that 3 cards because I'm sure it would help you in the future, you have to use that deal 3 damage mode of that card instead. Because if you don't, you're just going to be dead and be out of the game. So it's an extreme example, but it kind of highlights how not only does the efficiency of the card matter on what axis it's best at fighting, but so does the context of the game state itself. Based on any given game state, different axes are going to be important at any given time. And it's going to be constantly changing and constantly shifting. And this is just a baseline overview video. If you want me to make more videos about this kind of topic, I can certainly do that. But like, it can get very, very complex. This is just kind of an overview of how I think about the game at a baseline level. What axis is most important is also dependent on the deck you're playing, as well as the deck your opponent is playing. So I'm a little scared that I'm in over my head, but the way I see it, 4 of the top decks in the format have an axis that they excel at over the others. I think they all excel at all of the axes, to be honest, at any particular time. They're top decks for a reason, but I think that these decks each amplify a separate axis. So, Cure ECL makes use of cards that do a little for a lot, like Overwhelming Barrage and Vader, as well as advantage engines like Reinforcement Walker and Dr. Pershing, and they fight really good, and I think they fight best over the card advantage axis. Han Solo through his action ability, his deploy allowing him to go from a burst of 5 resources to 7 resources, and DJ being able to effectively permanently steal a resource, leaving you up 1 while your opponent is down 1 resource, gives him a huge edge in the resource advantage game. Sabine pretty obviously fights for damage and board control with super efficient units, as well as direct damage cards like Forecast I believe in, and buffing them so that they are hard to remove, giving them even higher advantage in the damage race, as well as an early deploy, again pushing in that damage and board control race. This is the one that's the most interesting, and shout out to John Tata for helping me kind of confirm this thought. I think Django Tarkentown has probably the most flexible action economy of the top decks right now. If you need to dirtle with action or dirtle actions with cards like On the Doorstep or various cheap cards like Greedo or Reckless Gunslinger, you can do that, and you can kind of be in the more take more action side of the action efficiency battle. However, if you need to just slam Triple Dark Raids and Ruthless Raiders and Fetch Fire Sprays in order to put pressure on your opponents, you can do that too. Not to mention, Django Fett inherently as a leader gets to disrupt your opponent's action economy by tapping down an opponent's unit. But even here, these decks kind of bleed into each other's lanes very often. Sabine can often put on so much pressure it forces your opponent to be resource and action inefficient, which gives you effective edges in those areas. And sometimes your opponent has to use multiple cards to answer one of your threats, giving you effective card advantage. Han with Tech and all the Smuggle cards lets you see and play so many cards you often get ahead on card advantage, and Cunning inherently as a card is so good at both pushing damage and condensing actions, getting you ahead in action efficiency. Kira often makes use of Ramp to get ahead on resources so that they can more effectively take control of the board with their flip, and cards like OB and Devastating Gunship help control the board. Plus, Ambush as a mechanic is a natural action condenser, getting to both attack and play a unit in one that cards like Vader and Energy Conversion Lab, the base itself, allow them to catch up in the action race. Django Tarkentown, by tapping down units, naturally also gets to get ahead in the board control and damage race by deciding where damage gets to go, and both Triple Dark Raid and Sneak Attack naturally cheat on resources, giving them a resource advantage. So why did I make this video? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, but like I said in the beginning, when asked by friends about how I think about certain game states and why I take certain actions, I often kept coming back to this analogy of a slider, and eventually it became multiple sliders, of almost like a volume mixer, you pushing one slider up while pulling the other slider down. And it's all about evaluating, maximizing the most in one area while trying to sacrifice as little as possible in others. So, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was somewhat coherent. I put a lot of time into this video. I don't know how well the recording came out. This was probably the hardest video I've had to record, just from like a complexity standpoint, as well as effort put into in writing a script. And so I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope it's coherent. Please interact. Please let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this, if you'd like to hear me talk about this more. And yeah, if you thought this was helpful for you. For some, I think a lot of these concepts might come intuitively. For me, some of them did, but especially tackling the action axis, like the axis of action advantage, it really opened up my eyes to what other players might be going through if they're new to card games, of like, what the heck even is card advantage? Why do you care about cards? I just want to deal damage to base. Or why do you care about the board? I just want all the cards in my hand. Or, kind of coming at something with new eyes again really opened my eyes to the other areas as well. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. I have another video coming out once all the leaders are revealed, going over all the leaders. I'll see you later.